just realized that I committed full-fledged plagiarism, and I am seriously breaking down over it. Throwaway account. I, 24F, graduated from my bachelor's a few years ago, and recently, I received an email from an academic to access my thesis. I recognize the name of the academic as someone whose work I closely followed in my study. Thinking of it as a compliment, I went back to reread it just to see it from her perspective before I grant her access. That's when I realized I had plagiarized her papers. I had referenced her work quite a few times, however, my sloppiness led to me eventually passing off her work as mine due to insufficient referencing, improper paraphrasing and not attributing her work enough credit. At the time of writing, I had left things too late and was mentally struggling, which led to my panicking and basically plagiarizing her work. I spoke to a professor, who I know personally, about the issue, and she thinks I'm being paranoid and that lots of bachelor's students mess up like this, but I am the only person who has read both her works and my dissertation. I am now spiraling. I planned on having an academic career, and in the process of starting my PhD. Now, I've destroyed it because of this giant mistake. I feel terrible about what I did, and extremely embarrassed. I imagine that the person whose work I plagiarized would feel hurt and angry about this, and it pains my stomach to think about it. In my head, naively thinking that because I had referenced her work a number of times, and that my Turnitin percentages were good, it would be fine. I also got an A on this paper. Now that I have a master's, and reading it with a trained eye, I see that it's absolutely not okay. And I just want to disappear. I don't know how I ever thought this was acceptable work. She has not yet read the paper, but I feel that she has requested access due to suspicion from the abstract, and morally it is eating me up. I poisoned my coworker a few years ago because they would steal my lunches on a daily basis. So my coworker would steal my lunch for weeks. My lunches were expensive and homemade, so it attracted lunch stealers. I knew that they were allergic to nuts. One day I prepared my lunch with nuts in them and they, of course, stole it, ate it, and their face blew up like a pufferfish and had to be rushed to the hospital. It was a pure accident, but they learned their lesson. Rock at someone that caused that person to get surgery and no one knew it was me. For context, I was 11 and at that time, my family and I would always go to my grandparents' house, and when I was there, me and my cousins would always sit at the porch and take walks across the street. But one day a fight was caused between us and my grandparents' neighbors' kids. It was a really big fight to the point everyone started throwing rocks at each other. I almost tripped on a big rock and thought it would be good to use against them. So I threw the rock at one of my grandparents' neighbor's kids and I swear I heard a crack in her head. The kid was crying and I really felt guilty and felt my stomach hurting, but I was immature, to the point I pinned it on one of my cousins and he kept telling everybody he didn't do it and he was constantly getting punished for it, and I always feel guilty for what I did every time I remember this. It caused a massive horse stampede with terrible injuries when I was in elementary school, and everyone still thinks it was an accident. This story is even crazier than it sounds. When I was in first grade, I was that kid who wanted to live in the forest, be a werewolf, be a feral human, etc. I was weird basically. I was also a huge horse girl and was in horseback riding lessons. My ultimate dream was to run away into the forest and live on my own, hunting and gathering and other stupid things like that. One day, before a trail ride at lessons, I came up with a plan to steal a horse, ride it into the surrounding woods, and disappear. I remember feeling slightly uneasy because I was assigned a different horse than my usual one when the day came, but I had already committed to my plan. We started riding, and when we got deeper into the forest, I vividly remember thinking to myself, it's now or never, and I kicked the horse with my heel to make it go faster, attempting to lead it with the reins off the path. Unfortunately, this backfired, and the horse reared up on its hind legs, taking off at an insane speed and leading the other horses with it. I was barely hanging on and remember how bad it hurt to have the horse rattling my spine around as it galloped. Shortly it kicked me off and I spun out onto the ground, laying there and watching all the other horses with little girls barely hanging on jumping above me like Mufasa in the antelope stampede. My jaw dislocated and I couldn't close my mouth, and my spine felt like it had been ripped apart, and my face was completely dripping in blood from scraping along the trail. Along the trail I could see other girls scattered around, similarly bloodied and crying. After a long while of laying there, someone came by on a four-wheeler with a trailer attached and piled all of us crying elementary girls up into it. When I got back to the home base, my dad told me that they saw the horses running at insane speeds with no girls attached to them at the end of the trail and had to send the guy out to get us. It scared the shit out of them, and the trail instructor said there must have been something that spooked the horses and caused the stampede, and they compensated us with free passes to come back for rides in the future. I still have a messed up jaw and back from the incident, and for a long while of my childhood I had a scarred face in many photos. It was a crazy incident that scared my parents to death, and I feel terrible for the stress it caused them, especially because I was a rather sickly child with a lot of physical health concerns. To this day, nobody knows I did it on purpose. Everyone thinks it was an accident and caused by outside forces, but I know that it was all my secret plan to live out my feral child dreams, and I will never tell. Dine and dash at Denny's. I had no money and no food and was tapped for 2 days. I had no food and no money and it was 2 days before I was going to get more. I went the rest of the day without eating, then the next day had a large breakfast at Denny's with no intention of paying. I asked for more pancakes, then as soon as she left, I casually left and never went back. Fast forward a few years. I mailed the restaurant a letter of apology, told them what I did, and included money to pay for the meal and a tip. Law drank my ball juice and my, now, wife doesn't know. About a year and a half ago I saw a TikTok video about how if you dip your balls into pineapple juice you can taste it. This piqued my interest because we always had a carton of pineapple juice in the fridge due to my girlfriend's pregnancy cravings. I did Googling and it was supposedly true and it said that we have taste buds in our balls. It can't be true, I thought to myself, thinking it was another thing that's dangerous for you to be trending at the time. And 2021 me was desperate for any clout, even if that meant harming myself doing so. In fact, if I did this I would probably get more fame from it. No pain no gain. I ran straight downstairs into the fridge and poured the juice. As nobody was at home at the time, I learned the answer squatting in the middle of the kitchen, pineapple in hand. I heard the key to the door rattle. I quickly scrambled to pull my trousers up and help with the shopping, leaving the glass on the counter. My mother-in-law rushes past me sweating in the heat wave. I carry the shopping into the baby's room. I walk into the kitchen humming a song that had been stuck in my head at the time. My heart drops. There stood my mother-in-law drinking my ball-infused pineapple juice. They both looked up confused to my sudden silence. I just forced a smile and went to help cook dinner horrified. They still don't know to this day. I don't know how to tell them. Should I confess? Paid to steal a sign and got caught. Kind of. My friend 16 meters, and I 18 meters, are both almost out of money, so we approached our older friend who always has a job. He said he would pay us to steal a sign out in the woods. The city just chopped down a bunch of trees and he needed the private property sign gone so he could go in and load as much wood as possible. We went out wheeling one night and he brought us to the spot, but my friend and I were too drunk to realize he was talking about government property and a government sign. We go out the next day in the middle of the night in my old car. Our older friend told us the road the sign was on has cameras, so we removed my back plate about a mile away and we're also going to remove my front plate, but I forgot it's not screws, it's bolts on the front. We backed into the road and I sat in the car waiting for my friend. We had to cut the sign in half since it was pretty long and my old car isn't big. I was wondering what was taking so long, so I go out to check on my friend and I see that the handsaw broke. He tried to use the serrated part of his knife, but then his knife broke. I ended up holding the sign while he used the piece of metal off the handsaw trying to cut the sign as fast as he could. About 10 minutes later a truck pulled up on the main road and sat in front on my car for a few seconds, most likely to write down my plate, then pulled in next to my car. My friend's girlfriend came with us and got out of the back seat to see what the woman in the truck had to say. She told us we were on private property and had to leave, then left. As soon as she was gone down the main road, my friend stood up, jumped on the sign and it broke. We put everything in the trunk and drove back to town in the opposite direction. As we were driving back to town, the same truck passed us, probably looping around to see if we were still there. When we were unloading everything is when we finally realized the sign is government property and we just committed several felonies. A week later the sign is hidden off my property. We aren't wearing the same clothes we did that night for a while. My old car is chilling out of sight, and I finally calmed down. The lesson learned from that experience: always bring a backup saw.